Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau met with the premiers and agreed that more federal funding for healthcare is needed from Ottawa, just not right now. The Alberta director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation says our province's top universities need to rein in spending. And Alberta Health, along with the City of Lethbridge, have given Nikiyuko the thumbs up to host the Winter Light Festival.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The Alberta government says 18 more Albertans have died as a result of COVID-19 over the past 24 hours. That brings the provincial death total to 684. There are currently 20,161 active cases in the province, and fortunately, almost 56,000 Albertans have also recovered from the novel coronavirus. Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, says changes are being made as to how many are allowed to visit loved ones in hospital. There are currently 684 in hospital with COVID-19 related symptoms, along with 123 in intensive care.
AHS has made the difficult decision to limit on-site designated support people in all acute care facilities. Effective Monday, access for designated support persons in AHS acute care settings will be limited to just one designated support person for each patient in ambulatory care, emergency departments, urgent care, maternity or postpartum, and other inpatient areas. Access will be limited to up to 2 designated support persons for each patient in critical care, pediatrics, and the neonatal intensive care unit.
As for the South Zone, we currently have 21 people in hospital with 3 in intensive care. In total, there are 612 active cases in the South Zone here, including 232 in Lethbridge. Close to 3,800 have also recovered from the novel coronavirus. The Alberta government's announcement that all movie theatres will have to temporarily close on December 13th was another big blow to theatre owners. The Movie Mill in Lethbridge is now having to face being shut down for 4 more weeks. The owner of the mill, Len Binnings, says he stands to lose up to $80,000 during the shutdown. He's not happy about it and is asking everyone to sign an online petition called Save Your Cinema.
SaveYourCinema.ca. It's very easy to go to, and it's an attempt to help save cinemas. It was started by some independent theaters. There's over 3,000 screens represented in Canada. It's supported by the Motion Picture Theatre Association of Canada. And it's an attempt to basically get the word out to local and provincial and federal politicians that this is an industry that is in dire straits, and the value that it brings of showing Canadian cinema, but cinema in general. It brings entertainment and the arts to people.
If you want more information and would like to sign the online petition, visit the Save Your Cinema website. Good news for those in southwestern Alberta who enjoy seeing thousands of Christmas lights. The Winter Light Festival at the Nikiyuko Japanese Garden is still a go. The garden received approval by Alberta Health and the City of Lethbridge to continue with the festival even during the COVID-19 pandemic. Organizers did say, however, that the planned Shakespeare in the Garden and all horse and wagon rides have been cancelled to prevent gatherings. Masks or face coverings are now mandatory for all guests visiting the Winter Light Festival, and visitors may only attend in their household cohort groups. Imagine cans of stacked food high enough to create intricate designs. That's what you have when you look at the recipients of the Construction Exhibit Awards. As Micah Quinn explains now, this initiative was a fun way for businesses and schools to build structures out of cans to support local food banks in our city.
This is St. Basil's Cathedral, which was intricately put together by the students of Calvin Christian School. The school won the Construction Awards for structural ingenuity, most cans, and the People's Choice Award.
We thought this was a very valuable experience for our students. Not only is it an excellent fundraiser, but it also allows students to do design work and to really learn to work together as a team. And that's what made this so valuable.
A total of 5,170 cans were used to create the cathedral.
We chose such a wide variety for the different colors. We wanted all the colors to be roughly similar, like all the beans are roughly the similar color, but we want different shading to really catch the color structure of St. Basil's.
Associated Engineering in Lethbridge also won 2 awards for the best use of labels and Best Original Design for their creation of the Tower Bridge.
So our design ended up using 3,700 cans, and we used 240 boxes of macaroni as well. So with construction, you're allowed, a bunch of time to do your design and your preparation and for raising the money, because that's a big one. We need to make sure we raise enough money to purchase all these cans.
4,323 pounds of food was raised for the Lethbridge Food Bank for the Construction event,
which is equivalent over $11,000 worth of canned items, which was incredible to be able to receive that. And essentially, especially when it hit early in the COVID time, to have some stock of food in our warehouse, it was amazing.
Save On Foods took home the last award for the best meal with their version of a canned crab. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Lethbridge Police Service officially has more boots on the ground today. The LPS graduated 8 community peace officers. The Siksika Nation will also receive some much-needed help. As video journalist Ainsley O'Reilly explains now, these officers are part of a greater plan to help keep our community safe.
I just signed off their certificate, so they'll be starting immediately. So we are really happy for them to join our family.
After completing 10 weeks of training, 8 CPOs were sworn in on Friday, all part of a long-term plan to free up time for LPS officers to head out on priority calls. In turn, the peace officers will provide a uniform presence downtown.
I like to think of myself as a very kind of outgoing person, so just going out and talking to people and getting to know people and help people, that's really what I'm most excited about.
The new graduates say they haven't received much formal instruction on COVID-19 bylaw compliance, but hope to educate. Amidst the pandemic, the Siksika Nation is in dire need of enforcement. With the second largest nation in Canada geographically, Chief and Council say this has been a need for a long time.
Well, how can you enforce those when you don't have a security, when you don't have a policing, when you don't have a enforcing mechanism in place? This pandemic is not the beginning of this crisis. We've not had policing at Siksika for a long time. So the pandemic has just amplified the crisis.
LPS Chief Shaheen Madizadeh says the partnership is an important step in reconciliation.
Moving forward, how we can actually, all of us, work more collectively together.
Since their introduction in 2019, more than 7,300 occurrences have been handled by CPOs in Lethbridge. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
2 more drug dealers have been arrested thanks to a joint investigation between Alert and the Tabor Police. Officers say the arrest and seizure took place on Wednesday of this week at a home in Tabor. As a result of a search warrant, police confiscated 31 grams of cocaine, 4 grams of suspected fentanyl, body armor, brass knuckles, and $930 in cash. 27-year-old Cade Melath and 24-year-old Ireland Conroy are facing a number of drug-related charges. Police want to remind you that if you see any drug or crime-related activity in your neighborhood, to call Crime Stoppers. A local motorcycle club that connects like-minded veterans is speaking out about the struggles of post-traumatic stress disorder. As Loris Alexander explains now, this group of brave veterans is concentrating on fighting the stigma attached to PTSD.
We've taken people, basically from their basement and put them in a chapter with other guys that can relate to what they've been through. And, we've had a problem with suicide. There's people in our club that either tried to commit suicide or have thought about it.
If we get together, we can ride. We don't even have to talk. It's just being with somebody of our group that basically has experienced the same thing you've experienced, been through what you've been through. It might not have been the same tour, it could have been, a couple years apart or whatever like that, but there's that understanding.
The club helps the members just by being part of an organization that has goals geared towards helping other brothers.
I think the commitment is a lot of it's to do with the camaraderie that we experienced when we were in the military. And probably a common theme there, but it's quite true. And we don't care if a person was a private or a colonel. We don't care if he was Army, Navy, Air Force. We don't care if you served in a combat zone, jumped out of an airplane, or rode around in a truck. It doesn't matter to us. It's the club. We put our club first. By putting our club first, we're actually putting each other first. We look out for each other, coast to coast, day in, day out.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
Alberta Health Services has identified 2 new cases of COVID-19 at Wilson Middle School in Lethbridge. The AHS says there are now 4 active cases at the school. Grade 7 and 8 students, like all middle schools in the province, shifted to at-home learning. The grade 6 students will continue to attend in-person classes until Lethbridge School Division's Christmas break. One of the potential COVID-19 vaccines that Canada has conditionally agreed to buy has hit a bit of a roadblock. Drug makers GlaxoSmithKline and Sanofi say their vaccine won't be ready now until late next year because it is not effective in older people. They plan to reformulate the vaccine and do more testing. Health experts say the setback is significant because Sanofi is a leading producer of flu vaccines and has large-scale manufacturing capacity. Pay raises at the University of Calgary and the University of Alberta have cost taxpayers $154 million since 2015. Now that's according to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, which obtained documents through Freedom of Information requests showing thousands of employees receiving raises. And that doesn't sit well with the Alberta director of the CTF, Franco Terrazzano. He joins me now from Calgary. Now, so Franco, what's wrong with receiving a raise? Hardworking Albertans deserve them, do they not?
You have so many families, so many workers outside of government who have been struggling with pay cuts or even worse, job losses. How many small businesses do we know in Alberta that shut down over the last 5 years? Right now, so many small businesses are really holding on by a thread, don't know whether or not they'll be able to fully recover. And now we find out that pay increases at top universities are costing us over $150 million during the downturn. Well, you know, that's coming from the pockets of families. That's coming from the pockets of businesses, of taxpayers, and struggling students as well. So really, we need our university employees, all government employees, to really share in the economic realities right now. And that's why we're calling on Premier Jason Kenney to ask these university employees to take a pay cut.
Now, when it comes to proposed tuition hikes of up to 15% next year, you say the blame should be laid on the universities and not so much on the Kenney government?
First, we need to understand that Alberta spends significantly more per student on post-secondary education than other large provinces. And, you know, we've heard students point the finger at the United Conservative government, but we think they really need to be having some tough conversations and asking some tough questions to the university administrators, right? Because we've seen thousands of university employees receive pay increases during the downturn. And you know what else is startling? We saw thousands of university employees receiving pay increases even during 2020. You know, while the rest of Albertans are struggling with the lockdown, with the pandemic, so many workers outside of government are taking pay cuts or losing their job, and we're seeing thousands of university employees get a pay increase this year. And, you know, we really have to call a spade here. This is just simply unfair.
That was Franco Terrazzano, Alberta Director with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Legal action has been taken against the Manitoba government by the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms. The injunction was made to end what is being called the violation of Manitoba's charter freedoms. Joining me now to discuss this is a Winnipeg lawyer with the Justice Centre, Alison Pejovich. Alison, how is the Manitoba government violating citizens' rights?
So in our notice of application, we've outlined various charter infringements perpetrated by the government here, and they include violations of Manitobans' rights to assemble. If you try to protest here, you're given a ticket, especially if you're in a group larger than 5, and you can't have people over to your home at all unless it's for childcare or renovation. So that's also a breach of people's right to assemble. And further, you can't go to church at all here unless you're in a parking lot. So that's we would say, gross violation of citizens' freedom of religion and freedom to worship. And also freedom of expression has been violated because when you're at a protest, you're expressing yourself. And when you're at church and the ministers at church are expressing themselves and they're unable to do that, we argue properly from an online service or from standing outside and talking to a bunch of cars.
Now, the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms has already launched a similar lawsuit against the Alberta government, and more are coming against other provinces?
We're number 2 here in Manitoba. The first was launched by Alberta last week. They're asking for an injunction against the government of Alberta with respect to very similar charter rights and freedoms, and to have these violations end against the citizens of Alberta. Alberta recently went into a draconian lockdown, much like Manitoba. So next will be Saskatchewan and Ontario, and we're challenging these violations, a little bit differently in each province due to the different public health acts in each province, but basically the attacks are very similar.
That was lawyer Alison Pejovich with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, joining me from Winnipeg. Another person has died of COVID-19 at one of the worst hit long-term care homes in Saskatchewan. The Saskatchewan Health Authority says a 12th resident of Parkside Extended Care in Regina has died. So far, 141 residents have tested positive for the novel coronavirus. The Health Authority is now co-managing the privately owned Parkside Extended Care facility and has taken over its day-to-day operations. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the federal government sees a need for it to do more to provide funding for the provinces to support healthcare systems. He says, however, that any discussion must wait until after the COVID-19 pandemic. Premiers have been pressing Trudeau for a large bump in federal health transfers.
As we get through this crisis, we need to recognize that our healthcare system needs fresh injections of federal funds. And I look forward to the conversations that will happen as we get a little more clarity on the challenges that our healthcare system is facing and our economy is facing for the coming years. Those are going to be important conversations. And as I said, the federal government will be there to increase its share at the same time as we work to deliver better outcomes across the country for Canadians. And that's why we'll also be talking about accountability and transparency for Canadians of new investments in healthcare.
The border is going to stay closed until at least January 21st. Prime Minister Trudeau says Canada and the United States agreed to another 30-day extension of the restrictions that went into place back in March. The deal only allows for essential travel, including the trucking industry and healthcare workers in border communities. We had lots of cloud cover and cooler today, but a warming trend is on the way. Details are coming up with a look at the long-range weather forecast in just a moment. We had some fog, lots of cloud cover, and cool today. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, the cooler temperatures should remain for the weekend, but then we'll see a bit of a warming trend?
Yeah, that's right. We should actually be seeing more seasonal averages once we get past this chilly weekend ahead of us with the wind chill. So wind chill factors tonight are going to feel more like minus 18 or 19 instead of that minus 13, which is the overnight low. Into tomorrow, a high of minus 6, but with that wind chill, again, going to feel more like minus 12 in the afternoon. Minus 10 the high on Sunday with overcast sky. And then we get into those seasonal averages finally after this time of year. 0 degrees expected for both Monday and Tuesday, minus 1 on Wednesday, and back to 0 for next Thursday. So the almanac, like I said, was telling us that the average high for this time of year, 0, which we're going to be seeing later on into next week. Minus 12, the average low. 15 was the high temperature back in 1993, and it was a freezing minus 37 in 2000. Sun rose this morning at 8:19 a.m. in our afternoon sunset today at 4:31 p.m. Giving us about 8 hours and 12 minutes of daylight. Okay, so let's look at the west coast. A mix of sun and cloud happening in Victoria, 6 degrees the high, 5 for Vancouver, under sunny skies. Could see some flurries in Edmonton tomorrow with a high of minus 6. Minus 5 is the expected high in Calgary with a mix of sun and cloud. They will also be experiencing a little bit of wind chill as well. Same with us here in Lethbridge. Much the same for the prairies as well with that wind chill factor. Minus 7 the high for Saskatoon. They could feel some or see some flurries tomorrow. Mix of sun and cloud expected in Regina with a high of minus 8. Minus 7 the expected high for Winnipeg tomorrow with a mix of sun and cloud. Now over here is where we get a little bit of a mixed everything. Showers expected tomorrow in Toronto with a high of 4. There's a low pressure system coming into the area of Quebec and near Ottawa as well. 0 the high for Ottawa tomorrow. They could see a lot of precipitation. Same thing for Montreal. Could see kind of that wet, freezing rain, sloppy weather over the weekend. 3 the high for Fredericton. 5 is the high expected tomorrow for Halifax. 1 in Charlottetown and 1 degree expected in St. John's, Newfoundland with a mix of sun and cloud. There you go. That is your forecast.
Canadian households owed an average of $1.71 for every dollar of disposable income in the third quarter. That is well below the $1.81 owed in the third quarter of last year. Stats Canada reports household savings remained high at $56.8 billion. The agency says there was a record increase in mortgage borrowing during the quarter and that housing investment hit an all-time high due to low borrowing costs. Calgary-based Interpipeline says 93% of its $1 billion in capital expenditures next year will be spent on driving new growth. The company plans to spend $800 million on the Heartland Petrochemical Complex, which is expected to start up in early 2022. Interpipeline says the rest of its capital spending will go to keeping up on existing projects and making oil sands pipelines more efficient. The Walt Disney Company unveiled a host of streaming offerings, including plans for 10 Star Wars series spin-offs and 10 Marvel series that will debut on Disney+. The company says, however, that it is still dedicated to releasing many of its big-budget movies in theaters. Disney's chief executive laid out supersized ambitions for its direct-to-consumer efforts, leaning heavily on some of the company's biggest brands. The company says there are now close to 89 million Disney Plus subscribers, which is up 15 million from last month. 13 years after its founders first rented air mattresses in their San Francisco apartment, Airbnb is making its long-awaited stock market debut. The company raised $3.7 billion US in the initial public offering.
I remember when we started Airbnb, I said, this is going to be huge. One day, thousands of people will use this product. But I think what happened was we created a new category of travel. And I think that category of travel is in a massive market. So the total addressable market for what we do for stays and experiences is $3.4 trillion. It's a very meaningful percentage of the global economy. And so I think that, probably it's safe to say that people just see a very big opportunity for a long period of time to come. It's just such a huge market. We tried to run this company as a public company for the last few years, and we've been under the eye of the world already. And however difficult it is to be a public company, it's probably not as hard as being a travel company in a pandemic. So we've done some pretty difficult things. And I think the key is being focused, and being mindful of your stakeholders, but not letting that drown out your sense of where you're going. It's really important you don't ever forget that.
Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 44 points in the day to finish at 17,548. The Dow was up 47 points to 30,046. The S&P 500 was down 4 points to 3663, and the Nasdaq was down 27 points in the day to 12,377. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 24 cents to 46.54 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 4 cents to 2.60 US. Gold was up 3.27 to 18.39.85 US an ounce, and silver was down 5 cents to 23.95 US an ounce. Wheat is at $272 per metric ton, barley's at $272 as well, canola's at $5.91, and corn is at $292 per metric ton. Live cattle were up $1.40 to $113.25, feeder cattle were up $2.13 to $139.73, and lean hogs were down $1.88 to $63.23. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 78.30 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, good news if you enjoy looking at thousands of Christmas lights. The Winter Light Festival at the Nikiyuko Japanese Garden is still a go. The garden recently received approval by Alberta Health and the City of Lethbridge to continue with the festival even during the COVID-19 pandemic. Organizers did say, however, that the planned Shakespeare in the Garden and all horse and wagon rides have been cancelled to prevent gatherings. Masks or face coverings are now mandatory for all guests. The COVID-19 pandemic has created an epidemic when it comes to anxiety and depression. Dr. Greg Jan, psychologist, has details in an interview with Jeanette Roche in just a moment.
The COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact not only on our physical health, but also our finances and our emotional health. One of the spinoffs is an increase in domestic violence, which according to some sources has doubled during lockdown. These instances of intimate partner violence are the result of a number of factors, including stress, tight quarters, and financial trouble. In some countries like the UK, the number of calls to hotlines has increased by as much as 700%. Today's guest is Dr. Greg Jantz, a psychologist who specializes in depression, stress, and anxiety disorders at his world-renowned The Center, a place of hope in Seattle, which is one of the top facilities for treatment of depression in the U.S. Dr. Jantz joins me now via Skype from Edmonds, Washington. Dr. Jantz, welcome back to the show.
Oh, it's good to see you. Good to be here. Yeah, what an important topic we have.
Oh, you're telling me. Now, you say that these statistics should be of no surprise to anyone, and that the COVID restrictions have played a role in the increase that we're seeing in domestic violence. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yes, we're seeing an increase in three things. One, anxiety levels everywhere are at an all-time high. That's incredible. And we know that depending on where you live, even medication for anxiety is a little short supply. We also know that depression's at all-time rates. So really, we could say we have an epidemic of anxiety and depression within this pandemic. The numbers are increasing. With that is the increase in suicide and suicide attempts. Now, what we know is confinement, I'm going to say confinement, over a period of time, there's been a lot of chronic stress the last 6 months. We've seen issues such as domestic violence, abuse, emotional abuse. This is not talked about as much, but what we're seeing is it's way up as well, and we need to talk about it.
Yeah, now even before the pandemic, the rate of depression was on the rise, right? But you believe that there's a link between domestic violence and how people learn to cope under stress, right? Particularly in these times.
That's right. The stress has been chronic for over 6 months, and that chronic stress has been layered with a number of, well, uncertainties. There's been certain unrest. There's been, I call it a pandemic purgatory. People are not happy where they are. They can't go back, don't want to go back. And looking ahead, there's so many unknowns. And so anytime we have, if you will, confinement, isolation, restrictions, really oppression, we see an increase in addiction. So depending on where one lives, what we know is alcohol sales are certainly way up. Now, in certain areas, alcohol sales are up 500 to 600%. So I did a little personal experiment. I asked the checkout at a grocery store. I just said, hey, I leaned over the plexiglass. I said, what's your number one seller right now? And she said to me, it's alcohol. We can't even keep it on the shelves.
Wow.
So anytime we have alcohol sales up high, we're going to actually see an increase in abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse. So anything related to abuse also goes up when there's addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know that you counsel a lot of victims of abuse, but I would imagine you counsel also people who are using violence or abuse as a coping mechanism. So what do you tell these people? How do you turn them away from inflicting abuse and turn them towards the right coping mechanisms? And what is the right coping mechanism under the circumstances we're in right now? I know it's a loaded question.
Oh, sure it is. Well, I'll do my best. One of the things that we know, and thank you for asking, is that underlying issues need to be dealt with. So we serve folks who come in from all over. And they're here at our facility for a period of time. So we need to treat some of the underlying faulty coping mechanisms. Sometimes there's trauma. A lot of what we're seeing, though, is we're treating that underlying addiction that's been secret really for so long. And as we begin to address some of those issues, it's a lot easier to get at the core of, well, what makes a person an abuser? Where does that come from? And, so often it is a person who has had some trauma in their past. And so we do look at that. We know that abuse, emotional abuse, is all about power and control, how we're going to control another person. Generally, Jeanette, people do that because they feel afraid or they feel like they're losing control. So I'm going to try to increase control.
Makes sense, right? Especially in today, what's happening today when life is
Yes.
so out of control. They need to
Yeah.
feel a sense of control.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, you've authored a book called Unmasking Emotional Abuse, and it's available at
Yes.
aplaceofhope.com. So, Dr. Jantz, can you give us just a brief snapshot of what your book focuses on?
Well, emotion, we hear we hear things about sexual abuse, we hear things about physical and domestic violence, but one area we don't hear about is emotional abuse. It's the person that maybe they control you through words or through threats, or a threat of a threat. And, it's the person that has a lot of power in your life, and maybe they're give you that look and it's a threat. So it comes in various forms. So when I say unmasking, a lot of times we need to look at, well, what are the different forms that emotional abuse can be? Sometimes we think of just name calling, and it's so much more than that. So we need to have our eyes opened to what is emotional abuse, and then we can move on to, okay, now what do I do?
Can you maybe give us an example of what emotional abuse looks like, or maybe what the definition of it is?
Sure. Emotional abuse, if I was just to define it, it'd be to be treated unfairly and unjustly um, over a period of time. Now, it's not a one-time event. We all make mistakes. We might explode and we say something we regret. The healthy response is to say, wow, I am so sorry. Um, and would you please forgive me? That's a healthy response. But the emotional abuser just keeps doing those things without any remorse. So one form, I was just talking to somebody the other day, and she said, one of the things that my father said to me over and over and over growing up is, why can't you be more like your sister? Look at her. And there was constant comparison. And that was a message. The message is, you're not good enough. Look at how great your sister is. You're not good enough. And so that message over time ends up having an effect of really being emotionally abusive, because it's undermining your self-worth, your self-esteem, and it's cunning, but over time it does teach you that something must be wrong with me.
Wow. Do you think that emotional abusers realize what they're doing? And do they realize that it's hurting the victim?
There's two types, if I put two general camps. There's an emotional abuser that they're just kind of being that way because that's how they were treated. They learned it well. And so they've just continued that pattern. And with proper intervention and help, they can really learn to change that. And maybe they don't even realize how destructive they are. Then the other emotional abuser, they know, and their goal is to create harm. Their goal is to create destruction and to control you. Their intent is harm. And so they know what they're doing.
That's scary. Now, yeah. Now, in your book, you say that physical and sexual abuse are always accompanied by emotional abuse. Can you explain this?
Yes. Well, what we know is if you're ever a victim of sexual abuse, you have been emotionally controlled. If you've been a victim of physical abuse and you've been hit, there's a lot of emotional abuse that's packed into that. But what we don't usually look at is that emotional abuse can stand alone. Maybe you were never physically abused, maybe you were never sexually abused, but you grew up in that environment of name calling, that environment of comparisons, that environment of put downs, and over time that was fairly abusive. So emotional abuse can stand alone. Sometimes we make excuses for it. For example, we go, oh, that's just the way he or she is. That's just the way they are. And you kind of learn to live with it, and we deny how destructive it really is.
Now, how can we uncover and confront emotional abuse?
Well, we're going to uncover it by really opening our eyes to it. And that's why in the small book, Unmasking Emotional Abuse, I actually outline here's some things to look for. Um, and then there's a few strategies that can be helpful depending on the emotional abuser. There's times where we have to actually physically separate. It's so bad that we need to separate ourselves out away from that emotional abuse. Part of it is so we can regroup and have a plan, but also the message is this is no longer okay. And it's so easy to fall into that victim role where I'm just a victim, I allow it, and I make excuses for it. So my book is about how to empower you because you're no longer going to be the victim. Sometimes we need help. Sometimes we need somebody to stand alongside us, tell us the truth. Times we need an emotional protection, a shield of protection from all those fiery darts.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, is it possible that some people see abuse when there really isn't any?
Well, I think we can develop this hypervigilance. It's like I'm so sensitive. And if I have a lot of hurt and resentment in my life, I might misread things from people. I'm hypersensitive. And so you can take on offenses quite easily and where there was nothing ever intended. So it's the person that has been so hurt and traumatized and so full of resentment that they easily pick up an offense. It's like you can't say anything right to them. They misinterpret, and so that's where unforgiveness can take you.
Right. And it's possible that that person needs to work through some healing as well, because it sounds like
Yes,
they've been a victim in the past as well, and they're
that's
kind of
right.
carrying that into their present.
Yes.
Okay, so what are some of the impacts on an individual who is emotionally abused? And I think you just touched on one of them for sure.
Well, one effect will be they will suffer from depression. I'm living in a depressed state, so they will live in depression. The other, simply put, is they're going to live with a lot of anxiety. They're going to struggle with closeness or intimacy in relationships, not knowing who to trust or how to trust. They may feel like they're always disconnected from other people, disconnected from God. So there's a disconnect in their life. We call it attachment, where they really are having a hard time attaching.
Wow. Now, at the end of your book, you include steps to healing. So, what are some of these?
Well, I've hinted a little bit. Ultimately, there's got to be a place of forgiveness. That can seem so overwhelming. I have to move. Number one, I'm no longer going to be a victim. And I can't carry the poison of hurt and resentment in my life anymore. Yes, I was mistreated. Yes, I was abused. But I have to make a decision that I'm going to unload that toxic emotion, resentment, bitterness. And sometimes I really need some help on doing that. It's not always an instant just happens. It's an ongoing decision. And I think sometimes forgiveness and what needs to happen is so deep that, it really requires allowing God to help us.
Right. So, what does forgiveness look like to the person who has been abused?
Well, it looks like I'm no longer going to live a life of blame. What you did to me was wrong, but I am not going to live in that bondage. I am going to be who God called me to be. I'm going to live my life with good and healthy relationships. And I have a personal mission and calling that I'm going to live out. So it changes a whole trajectory of one's life.
Yeah. So, it looks like freedom is what it looks
Yeah,
like. Right.
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And for somebody who is on the other side of that, the abuser, what are some coping mechanisms that they can dive into so that they stop doing that? I mean, besides counseling, of course, which is
Sure.
very
Well, I think
important.
there does have to be accountability. There has to be, oh, such a deep desire, not only to change, but to understand that your words and actions have been damaging. And so, really, it's a development of a new empathy. I really need to have an empathy and a compassion for those who I've hurt. And that means taking responsibility. That means understanding it may be a long time before they really trust me. I need to prove myself in a whole new way. My point of focus can't be on other people. My point of focus has to be on really redemption and allowing God to work in my life and have accountability and to create change.
Thanks so much, Dr. Jans. Greg Jans is the author of Unmasking Emotional Abuse, available at aplaceofhope.com. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Good to be with you.
Do you need some health advice? Well, today's guest regularly sees patients who struggle with many different health conditions. Dr. Clayton Cogano, a naturopathic doctor in Lethbridge with Well Vitality Health Clinic. He also has training in conventional medicine with a Bachelor of Science in Exercise Science, Kinesiology, and 3 years of research on radiation and cancer at the University of Lethbridge. Dr. Cogano, welcome back to BCN.
Thank you for having me again.
Now, first of all, talk about your approach to finding solutions for the health struggles so many of us face on a daily basis.
Well, I guess in my office, I see a lot of different various things. You always want to try and get to the root cause of the problem when they come in, because a lot of patients that I see have been unable to figure out what's wrong with them. And so the very first thing that I want to do is sit down with them take a long time to go through all of their health history, all their medical history, all their labs. And you want to kind of sort through all of that and then figure out from there a plan moving forward. A lot of time it's history taking, and then further to that, further lab testing, either more in-depth lab testing or even just your general lab testing that just wasn't done. Often you can figure it out.
Now, you've said that in your daily practice, you sometimes come across chronic fatigue with a lot of your patients now. How common is chronic fatigue in today's society, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic?
Honestly, people put too much on their plates. People are very busy. That's one of the main reasons for chronic fatigue. There's a lot of other reasons, but it is extremely common in my practice. Yeah.
What are some of the causes of chronic fatigue? Like you said, being very busy, not getting enough rest, perhaps?
Yeah, and it kind of compiles onto other things. When stress is elevated, often people aren't sleeping well. Sometimes people can have other issues like perhaps low B12, blood sugar irregularities, low iron. So it's important to, in my opinion, even thyroid issues. And sometimes thyroid issues can get missed. So it's important to test things and test things in depth. And look at the complete history of what's going on and what's been going on in order to figure it out.
So what are some of the effective treatments outside of B12 and maybe cutting some of the stress out of our lives?
Well, it completely varies. Like a lot of times, if someone's having trouble sleeping, you have to try and start figuring out why they can't sleep. If someone has, for example, a lot of stress, you can't just tell them to quit work if work is their big stressor. You have to try and figure out ways to work around it, against the grain sometimes. So the first thing is to figure out what's wrong. For example, if it was a cortisol issue, which tends to be the case with a lot of patients with chronic stress leading to chronic fatigue, a lot of times you will want to treat that with different vitamins and herbs. And then as that improves, you want to double check that you're not missing anything. Like perhaps that person also has low iron or their thyroid isn't working properly. You have to treat the whole person in order to fix chronic fatigue. Otherwise, you'll get a patient that gets about 50% better and then plateaus.
You know, other people I've spoken to as well in the healthcare professionals saying, focusing on God's word and meditating and breathing that helps a lot as well. How about certain foods when it comes to stress? Are there certain foods as well that you can eat that can really help?
Lifestyle change is massive. It is massive. It is also probably one of the most difficult things for me to help someone with. You can tell people all day long to do something here and do something there, but ultimately that's the hardest thing for me because it's up to them when they go home to do it. In terms of foods, yes, absolutely. Eating a healthful diet, eating a whole food diet Even looking into food sensitivities, that can create a ton of fatigue in people if they're battling the food that they're eating all the time. So it's important, again, to look into things and take a complete history, because what I find actually is clinically, people that are coming in, they're coming in with bags of supplements and they're still tired. And it's not a supplement deficiency in people. It's a multitude of system failures that's causing it, and you have to figure it out.
Dr. Cogano, many people also go through bouts of insomnia. They just can't get any sleep. What do you think causes that? Is it a big part of it is not putting your phone down when you go to bed at night?
Again, yeah, a lot of lifestyle changes. Yes, there absolutely is. A lot of people don't prepare for bed. They have their TV in their bed, they're on their phone. It's a social area now versus an area just for sleep. And so that is a huge thing. There's other reasons as well for insomnia, and insomnia it can be a tricky thing. Sometimes breathing issues like sleep apnea can create patients that just don't get a restful sleep or not at all. Anxiety is a huge thing, and that goes hand in hand with chronic fatigue, and chronic stress in general leads to a lot of anxiety, in which we can help a lot with. And then there's other things like, for example, different neurological issues with the brain. Now, unfortunately, we can't test those. So that would be like, for example, a slight deficiency of melatonin or a slight deficiency of GABA, which is a neurotransmitter in your brain that stops the busy signal. But we don't know if it's one or the other or something else. And so in those cases, we have to guess with different herbs, different vitamins to try and fix it. Often you can, but it takes a couple tries for sure.
I remember years ago, my doctor told me, yeah, the herbs and the vitamins are good, but also at the same time, some warm milk. Is that still applied today, or maybe reading a book to help somebody fall asleep if you suffer from insomnia?
Oh yeah, I think the warm milk thing is more calming, right? I think. I don't know about that one, but I know that certain herbs like, chamomile tea is really calming. Rosemary is very calming. Passion flower root specifically, you can drink it as a tea, you can take it as a supplement. It just makes you calm. It doesn't necessarily put you to sleep, but it helps get your body ready for sleep.
Ever consider using CBD oil or capsules as a treatment for insomnia?
Yeah, CBD. It's a fairly new thing, especially since the legalization process. A lot of doctors are now delving into more research on it. Some of the research is promising on CBD for quite a lot of things, neurological things especially. So I think in certain cases of, for example, neurological insomnia, where there might be a brain chemical imbalance, something going on, it may prove benefit. And more research, the jury is still kind of out on it. And in some cases, it's been shown to actually make sleep worse. And some people will actually get anxiety on it. And so I think it's a potential option for people, but they definitely should talk to their doctor about it before they just go start taking anything, really. You want to be focused and accurate on what you're taking. That way, you end up just with better results overall.
Let's move on right now and talk about digestive health, Dr. Cogano, and let's talk specifically about the condition called leaky gut. What exactly is leaky gut?
Leaky gut is the general term for something called intestinal permeability, increased intestinal permeability. And what that means is that the enterocytes, or the cells in your small intestine, are slightly inflamed and irritated, and they're allowing larger protein particles of food to get into your bloodstream. And when a big piece of protein gets into your bloodstream, your body's not used to it. It's used to it being broken down to a certain size. So it sees it as foreign, and it starts to kind of attack it, and it can create an inflammatory response called an immunoglobulin response. And that can have widespread systemic effects on the body, meaning you could get anything from rosacea, eczema, psoriasis, acne, to chronic fatigue, to joint pain, to gut pain, to IBS. And so the testing for something like that is I find very beneficial to helping people who have a multitude of symptoms, especially those with gut issues like IBS, because irritable bowel syndrome is a diagnosis that doesn't tell anyone what the problem actually is. Most patients come into the office knowing their gut's irritated. So me telling them that they have irritable bowel syndrome does not help anyone. We have to try and figure it out. And one way to figure it out is through a blood test called an IgG blood test that can actually start looking at, oh, maybe what foods is this person sensitive to help them.
So what are some of the effective treatments for leaky gut?
I honestly, the first biggest thing is to try and figure out what foods or what product is irritating their gut and eliminate it. You have to get rid of the cause of the irritation. Sometimes the cause of the irritation is something more severe, like inflammatory bowel disease, like an autoimmune thing, maybe like celiac or heavy metal exposure, perhaps even antibiotics. So you got to get rid of whatever thing is irritating it first, and then you have to start working to heal the gut. And often I use a combination of L-glutamine and a high dose of omega-3, specifically a component in that called EPA, which is an anti-inflammatory. So you want a nice strong anti-inflammatory in the gut, and then you want glutamine, which helps to heal and bind the gut cells back together.
Now, there are many body cleanses in the market today. What do you think of those which claim to really cleanse your liver?
I think that there's overclaim to what a lot of them can do. I think that some will have benefit, but you also have to be careful. I just saw a patient just the other day that did a liver cleanse and ran into some serious issues because her liver didn't need it. And honestly, she even had some liver issues. I think that liver detoxes, and well, she didn't know, right? And so it ended up being an issue. I think you have to be cautious with it, but I think that the general idea behind it is positive. I think really it's meant to, detoxes, especially in the liver, are meant to improve circulations, maybe give your organs a little bit of a rest, improve toxic elimination, because that's what the liver does. So yes, you can absolutely do that. Provide your body with better nutrients, and even just increasing circulation, and really that's what a detox should be all about, is improving health, not depleting the body of a bunch of things.
We talk about alcohol potentially damaging the liver. How about certain foods that may have the same effect?
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of different foods that can damage the liver. Certainly you want to make sure that you're eating a healthful diet and a whole foods diet. And I find that the biggest thing is variety in the diet, because the liver itself is like a giant filter. So the more healthy whole foods, antioxidant foods that you're eating, the better it's going to function.
So a lot of berries, blueberries, raspberries, right? That really helps?
Exactly. The nice thing about the liver is it is one of the only things in your body that can regenerate. So if it's down to a quarter functionality, it will regenerate to 100%. But the biggest catch-22 with that is that often what we see is that people that have a liver capacity that's so low, they're often alcoholics or they're drug addicts, or they have issues that they cannot stop. So it often continues the decline. However, if you start treating your body healthfully, then that is one organ that can regenerate.
When is a good time for a detox? Any symptoms to look for that would signal that you need to do a detox? And I'm not talking about drugs or alcohol specifically here.
Oh, yeah. So in terms of timing, often if I'm going to tell a patient to do a detox, because detoxes can be a little bit depleting, often I say spring or summer. I find a lot of people are already extra fatigued in the winter. There's more disease going around, more influenza. And so you want to make sure that you're more boosting your body up in the winter. I think that spring and summer, you're a little bit more energetic, your body's a little bit better to handle something like that. So timing wise, that's definitely when you want to be doing them. Yeah.
What are some of the benefits of probiotics? There are different doses of probiotics. Now, do you go for one with the most?
No, you have to be careful with probiotics. It's also sort of an area that we don't fully understand yet in medicine. It's a fairly new thing in medicine, probiotics. We know that they're beneficial and they have lots of health benefits, but the microbiome in our gut is extremely complex. And there's certain times where you don't want to take a probiotic. For example, when I'm doing a gut healing protocol for leaky gut, right? I often now don't give a probiotic with it. And the reason is because sometimes people with gut issues also have other things along with it, perhaps candida, which is yeast or fungal overgrowth, or even something else called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO. And if the person has those things and we haven't tested them to rule them out, then a probiotic actually would make those conditions worse, and it would actually make the person feel worse. But by and large and in general, a probiotic for most people is safe, it's effective, it can boost up your immune system, and you don't need a massive quantity. A lower dose of probiotic typically is just fine, and you just want a multi-strain. So often you want to replete it with 11 to 12 billion or 11 to 12 different types of bacteria.
Dr. Clayton Coggino, naturopathic doctor in Lethbridge with Well Vitality Health Clinic. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much, Hal. Take care.
You too. On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Thanks so much for watching.